You've been following the conversation about Elon Musk. We're saying it looks like we're saying goodbye to him in May.
No, he has said he is going to work part-time,
Yeah, 1 or 2 days a week.
which
But
which
his time is up though, because he was only allowed to serve for 130 days, right? As a special employee. And so he's got to go at some point here.
it's up to Donald Trump. If Donald Trump wants to listen to his advice, and the DOGE, which is a fiction, it doesn't exist. It's all dependent on Donald Trump and what he empowers Elon Musk to continue to do.
The question is, did Elon Musk have success doing what he set out to
No, it's
do
a
here?
complete disaster.
Mm-hmm.
All you have to do is take a look at what's happening to department after department. Look, you hear the news today? Yesterday, day before yesterday, Marco Rubio said, "Oh no, we're not making cuts at the State Department." And now what is he announcing today? Massive cuts at the State Department.
Mm-hmm.
It's an absurd situation.
So Musk had set out to trim $2 trillion from the budget. And it looks like he only got to 150 billion. I mean, 150 billion is significant, but it's not 2 trillion.
No, it isn't. Not when it comes to the federal budget. Actually, what they promised to do, they've not been able to deliver, and thank God they haven't. But look at the damage they've done.
Right.
Have you called the Social Security office lately to try to get through?
Yes.
Arrange a meeting with somebody at Social Security? You can't do it.
Yeah, on behalf of my mother, I tried, and it was impossible. Yes.
Yeah, this is a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you voted for Trump or not. It's a disaster for the American people.
Elon Musk says there's are reports that he's saying that the attacks from the left are wearing him down. He's tired of being attacked. It's interesting because it seems to me like this is a guy who's seen a lot of criticism come his way. It surprises me that maybe his new public image of being kind of a Dr. Evilly is weighing on him, but it seems like maybe that has had an impact.
No, he thought he was invulnerable. He thought he was Elon Musk, the most successful, richest man in the whole world, and he thought he could overcome everything. The minute you get into politics, and we learned that as a radio talk show host, the minute you express opinions, you're going to have critics, and that goes with the territory.
Absolutely. I won't be sad to see him go. And
He's not going. You don't.
I think he will. I mean, I think he will go. You don't think he'll go? He has to go.
Of course not.
Unless they're going to hire him in some capacity. And I don't think that he wants to stay on. I think he's looking at tanking.
He said in his announcement, he will continue to consult with the president. And as long as the president values his advice, it'll be given. So there it is. He's not vanishing.
Okay, if you say so.
No, he says it. And the president says it, and that's what matters.
He said 1 or 2 days a week in May, but I don't think he can legally stay on as an employee of the United States.
He doesn't have to be an employee. He can still give advice to the president.
Right.
Bernard Baruch, the famous consultant to presidents, was never paid a dime, but his influence, according to some, was inordinate. So that's going to be the issue. And what happens to this DOGE department? If he's not there and Ramaswamy isn't there, who runs it? And will it continue to wreak havoc with the federal government? And the answer is, we'll find out. But I don't believe he has severed his ties with Trump. I think what he's reaping is the anger of the American people and certainly Tesla drivers about his neglect of his business. But, he's a billionaire. He can do it every damn well pleases.
You mentioned the State Department, and I saw a story yesterday about the Transportation Department. And they are going to be undergoing some big cuts to their workforce as well. And apparently, the Department of Transportation is now undergoing also the Career Transition Learning Series, which is the series of, I don't know if you saw this, it's a series of seminars for them, which include sessions on how to elevate your personal brand. And you learn tools about navigating career transitions with confidence. And there's also a section on coping with downsizing and job loss and managing your strong emotions. And some Department of Transportation employees are saying, really, you're going to teach me to deal with my strong emotions about losing my job?
It's a joke.
it
It's
feels like a slight.
ridiculous.
Yeah, it's very offensive to people, and so I don't know.
It's a
I mean,
joke. It
yeah,
doesn't mean anything. This is the continued interference by Donald Trump. Look what's happening in Health and Human Services.
yeah,
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is now talking about discontinuing the COVID shots for children. I
yeah,
mean, this is lunacy.
yeah.
There is no other way to put it. We've got the lunatics in charge of the asylum.
Yeah, it's pretty offensive. If I'm working at the Department of Transportation and they're sending me to a seminar about managing my big emotions regarding job loss, I think that's pretty offensive.
Well, the
So,
whole thing is crazy.
yeah.
And the trick will be eventually for people to catch on to the craziness. It's only been 100 days with Donald Trump.
Isn't that
So what
crazy?
happens at 200 days or 300 days? What
Come
happens
on.
when all of this catches up? And look, I know there are a lot of people listening to the sound of our voices now
Mhm.
who support Donald Trump. If this were Joe Biden, they would be up in arms. The
Yeah.
hypocrisy is what is astounding to me.
Can we move to immigration? Because a judge has extended the block on the deportation of alleged gang members when the Alien Enemies Act is being used. This is a federal judge in New York, and the judge is Alvin Hellerstein. He's temporarily extending this order, which detained migrants being held in the Southern District of New York cannot be deported without due process. Trump said this week that he can't possibly go to court for every immigrant that they're trying to deport. They don't want to go to court and have these folks have due process. They want to just get rid of them all.
That's the violation of the Constitution.
Right.
Donald Trump, in my judgment, has hit the point where impeachment proceedings legitimately should be invoked. This is a man who is acting above the law, ruling by executive order, and threatening to ignore the courts. And I think this is an American tragedy. So my answer to you is ultimately this has to catch up, and it will catch up at the Supreme Court. And then you're going to watch two people, Amy Coney Barrett and
Mhm.
the Chief Justice, John Roberts, and whether they go along with this nonsense. But the trick is that Trump is saying he doesn't care what the court says.
Yep.
Vice President Vance is saying he doesn't care what the court says. And those who believe in the extension of executive power are doing great damage to the American system. But this, by the way, was all part of Project 2025, which Donald Trump said he had never read, never seen, didn't know anything about. I mean,
Hmm.
the lunatics are in charge of the asylum, if you will, but the American people have got to stand up and just say no.
But they seem to be in some cases, but not all cases. And you would think this would be a united front. But there are some Democrats now who are publicly saying that they wonder if having this fight over, especially this one man who's become the face of this, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, if it's a political fight worth having.
Yes, it
There's
is,
that
because
I would agree with you.
individual liberties cannot be violated. And I
Right,
want to be clear, Donald Trump is talking about rounding up American citizens, people born, raised, bred in this country,
right.
if they are violent criminals, and deporting them to El Salvador. And I listened this morning to a member of the United States Senate not opposing that. That to me is absolute lunacy. Where are our rights as Americans? And by the way, you've got Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin now embracing another conspiracy theory about September the 11th and talking about this as a fact. There, we are really in trouble when we find ourselves in this position. Let me also point out to you that Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, did not show up for a meeting about a deal on Ukraine. And the whole Ukrainian business may collapse. And Trump and Rubio are saying, well, if we can't cut a deal, we'll just walk away. I
Right.
mean, do people understand? And I realize it's a lot. Do people understand the significance of having an administration that is not only lawless, but which has no real direction? Did you hear the president
Well,
and his Secretary of the Treasury again talking about tariffs? Secretary
yeah.
of the Treasury this morning blasted the IMF and the World Bank.
Mhm.
This is beyond uh, the normal realm of the world.
I'm
And so
glad
you
you
ask, what is the response? The response
yeah.
must be the Supreme Court ultimately, and I hope sooner rather than later. And I heard you talking about the idea of paying women to have babies, $5,000. There are countries which encourage government interference in the birth of babies. And the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were two countries that encourage people to have children and pay for it. What are they looking for? This whole deal is looking for more white children.
Yeah.
That's what he's looking for. And if people are too dumb to see it, well, that's what it is. I hope this dies. The whole idea of eugenics, of engineering a superior race, is embraced by too many people in the Trump administration. And this is something, again, which to me is not only offensive, but shocking. Oh, by the way, you heard this morning that Senator Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat in the United States Senate, has announced he's not running for re-election. Well, you all know that Illinois is a safe Democratic seat. That'll be the battle. Who will take that seat? But we are seeing now a shift in the Democratic Party in terms of leadership. And by the way, you will note I call it the Democratic Party because that's its name. It's not the Democrat Party. It's the Democratic Party. And all you have to do is understand that to understand the disconnect that now exists. One other quick point. The tensions over Iran are escalating, and the threats of military action by the United States and perhaps Israel are real. And the Ayatollahs don't give a tinker's damn one way or the other. That is a foreign policy question, which we are going to be discussing at great length on the Mark Thompson program and on everywhere else, because Iran represents a major issue. And, Trump makes these exaggerated claims. I'll make sure Iran never has a nuclear weapon. I'll end the war in Ukraine 24 hours after I'm elected president.
Right. None of the above is true.
Yeah, of course not. But the danger is the unbalanced nature of this presidency. And it is. I've offered to teach a course in 5 years on the Trump presidency, and I dread what I will have to talk about at that time.
Well, let's go back to the issue of due process and how some Democrats are saying that this case, focusing on this case of Mr. Garcia, is a deliberate distraction from the dwindling stock market, from the rising price of groceries, from the tariff policies which you mentioned. And so they're saying we shouldn't be focusing on this case of this man being deported and being deprived of due process because look at the economy, that it's being used as look at this shiny thing over here. But I would
argue, ignore civil liberties.
This is what I would argue. Go ahead.
You ignore civil liberties, we're all finished.
Right.
And by the way, they're talking now about, I just read about this case of a man who was born in America, an American citizen, and they're talking about deporting him.
Right.
This is, if we don't understand the fundamentals of civil liberties. Now, I will agree with those who say that what Donald Trump does is to throw a lot of stuff against the wall so we don't have time to play whack-a-mole. But believe me, those of us who are in this business, I'm prepared to play whack-a-mole. I'm prepared to expose it. But the question is, will the Republican Party ever develop a spine? Will it ever stand up? I had a call from somebody in Missouri who listens to my podcast and was very interested. He said, I'm a Republican, but I agree with you completely. What do we do? And my answer was, and hopefully he'll hear this as a reflection later on, is what we do is continue raising the alarm. And I realize that there are a lot of people who are just too busy, too distracted, not interested in taking this up, but we have to. By the way, yesterday was Earth Day. Have you seen what Donald Trump's policies have done? Withdrawing for a second time from the Paris Accords, drill, baby, drill, talking about something called clean coal, stripping the ability to have solar powers support. I mean, what we're looking at is a monumental disaster on an epic level. Because if we don't have, Adlai Stevenson said it. He's talked about the United States, about the world as a little blue ball in the universe. We have to protect that ball. He was absolutely right. We don't have anywhere else to go. And I think that the fact that environmental crimes are being committed by the Trump administration, and I call them crimes, they are crimes, need to be exposed as well. But Kim, in the 20 minutes or so that we have to talk, look how many issues you've raised. Look how many issues I've raised. And how many of these issues can people focus on to understand the importance? And I think the danger of Donald Trump is manifest and what his administration is doing. And I haven't even mentioned the issue of Vice President Vance, whose statements continue to be absolutely absurd. So these are real concerns, which I have every day. Somebody said to me, "Why don't you have a full head of hair?" I said, "Because I'm pulling it out over the Trump administration." But that, of course, is
Well, you went far down the road there with a lot of different topics, but I'm not quite finished talking about this due process. I think it's
go
really
ahead.
important, and I think that when due process is taken away for from one of us, then we're in big trouble, the rest of us. And I think that we don't need to look away. But Amy Klobuchar, who's a Democrat, Democratic senator from Minnesota, was on CNN's State of the Union over the weekend. And she says that they picked this case out, this Abrego Garcia case, because it's about a subject that they're trying to keep in the news. And here's a quote from her. She said, "They're doing it because they want to distract people from the fact that our economy is in a tailspin thanks to them. Their tariffs, the fact that you have got a business that they're looking at closing down or not investing, that costs are up, chaos is up, corruption is up, and the market is down." So she says that this is a distraction from that. But I don't think so. You have other Democrats that are trying to go to the CCOT prison in El Salvador to see if this man is okay, to keep attention on the fact that he's locked up and that he didn't get due process in America. I don't think that's a waste of time. And I don't think that it's a mistake that it's distracting from the real issue, because it's a real issue. It should be a real issue for every American.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Now that that is said, let's talk about the Voice of America. The Voice of
Oh,
America that was disbanded, but now a judge says it has to be restored.
okay. Let me explain to you. I have a long history with Voice of America. I've been interviewed by Voice of America countless times. It's not only Voice of America, it's Radio Free Europe. It's the Arabic and Spanish broadcasts that take place all over the world. What Donald Trump did in destroying the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe is an abomination. Now, you can talk about restoring. Let me give you an example, Kim. If I told you tomorrow we were going to recreate KGO,
Mm-hmm.
we'd struggle to do it. Personnel are no longer there. The people who know the ropes are no longer there. You'd have to rebuild from the ground up. And that's exactly what's going to happen to the Voice of America. For a Republican president to destroy the Voice of America, let me tell you, when I was active in the human rights movement for Soviet Jews, we used the Voice of America constantly to reach out, to let people know what was happening. And the world listened to the Voice of America. And the fact that Donald Trump has dismantled it is, to me, one of the most shocking, abhorrent things that could happen. And if you're a true conservative and you're a Trump supporter, you ought to agree with me. And what was his reason? His reason was that he said the Voice of America was a propaganda tool for the left. My God, the attack on the Voice of America was that it was a propaganda tool for American imperialism, hardly the left. So my sense is that rebuilding the Voice of America is going to be a tough task, and one that we will have to devote a lot of time and effort to.
The judge said that it was unlawful, indefinitely
Everything Trump
blocking.
has been
Yeah.
doing in this regard is unlawful. Can you imagine the actions he's taken with Social Security? I mean, look what DOGE has done. Look at what's happened to NOAA. When we have our first weather disaster and NOAA isn't on the bottom, and what about FEMA, for God's sake? We have a disaster and FEMA isn't available anymore. People don't understand the ramifications. Now, it's true that some will listen to the sound of my voice and say, "John, you're exaggerating." I'm not exaggerating. I've been around this game for a long time. I've seen what it takes to build an effective service. And whether it is through Health and Human Services or the State Department, let me just explain to you. And I say this as someone who's been a foreign policy consultant for years. You dismantle the State Department, whatever flaws it has. Where are you going to get the people to come in and do the work that needs to be done, who know the languages, who know the issues, who know country by country? Now they're talking about people in the State Department becoming generalists rather than specifically tied to particular countries. Are they nuts? How do you think you have a regional expertise? My regional expertise was the former Soviet Union and the Middle East. If I had generalized, I would have been of little use, say, when the Philippine crisis emerged. I am horrified by what is happening. But more important, our allies are horrified by what is happening. People who understand foreign policy in other countries are horrified by what the United States is doing. And Marco Rubio, who was a fairly decent U.S. senator, has proven to be completely out of his depth on this situation, 100%.
It's sad. I don't know if even if a judge says you can't dismantle the voice of America, if Trump and company will say, "Oh, we can't." Okay, well, let's try to put this back together. I just
No,
don't
no.
no.
They disregard court orders.
Right, right.
The order of faith in this administration is to disregard. In fact, the Attorney General of the United States pointed out, and properly so, that the district courts and the appellate courts are not in the Constitution. Who established the district courts and the appellate courts? The Congress did. And what the executive branch is now claiming, the Attorney General of the United States is claiming, is maybe we should just get rid of these district courts because nobody authorized them. I listened to these statements, and I don't want you to think I'm hysterical. I'm a very logical thinker. I've been doing this for many, many years. Many of your listeners have listened to me over many years. Let me assure you of something. I have never been as scared for my country as I am today. And what bothers me more than anything else is silence. Silence in the face of this kind of absolute nonsense. And I'm not exaggerating. I'm really not going overboard. Somebody said to me, actually, somebody I'm very close to said, "John, you suffer from Trump derangement syndrome." And I said, quite the contrary. I listen to what Trump says and I react. If I agree with him on something, I'm more than happy to say that I do. But the issues that you have raised, the issues that I have raised, are clear and definitive and precise. And I think need prayerful consideration by people who support Donald Trump. I guarantee you something, Kim. If you and I are on the air in 5 years, we will look back on this period with absolute horror. It will make the McCarthy period in American history look like child's play. And the tragedy is, it is the President of the United States and those surrounding him who are promoting these absurd theories. I was talking to a physician the other day who described to me his horror at what Health and Human Services is doing. I talked to a dentist who is horrified by the fact that fluoride is being removed from water. The idea that vaccines are being questioned. These issues are clear, they are precise, they are too numerous, some would say, but every single one of them needs to be addressed. And I want to be on record because this program is being heard by people who are recording it and sending it all over the place. I want this replayed in 5 years because I will absolutely guarantee you that the tragedy which is unfolding and which I am presenting to you today is absolutely precise and accurate.
I wonder if in 5 years, if we're chatting in 5 years, I think I will be, uh, proud that I was on the right side of history, that I will be confident that I wasn't wrong. But I wonder if people that were on the other side, on the MAGA side, that got caught up in all of this anger and chaos, if they will feel like they wish they would have done things differently.
It's a cult.
Yeah.
It's a cult in which the fearless leader is absolutely right on every point. The most interesting thing for me when I discuss this with MAGA people, and I do talk to a lot of people, as all of you know, I wish I were on the radio doing it every day. I asked them, just give me an example of where he's wrong. And the minute people hesitate on the question of a weakness, we're in deep trouble because nobody is perfect. And my wife reminds me of that on a regular basis.
Well, speaking of your comment that you've never been more afraid when you're looking at what's happening in America, I found this story I thought was perfect to raise with you. There was a poll taken. Apparently, hundreds of scholars say the United States is swiftly heading toward authoritarianism. They did a survey of more than 500 political scientists, scholars, and the vast majority think the United States is moving away from liberal democracy towards some form of authoritarianism. It's called the Bright Line Watch, this benchmark survey. and they surveyed US-based professors, and they had them rate the performance of American democracy on a scale from 0, which is complete dictatorship, to 100, which is a perfect democracy. And right after the election in November, they gave democracy a rating of 67. And now that we're several weeks into Trump's second term, they're giving it a 55. And that's pretty scary when you look at people who study this for a living and you see these numbers going down toward authoritarianism territory.
I agree with you. Look,
Mhm.
anytime a president of the United States can thumb his nose at the Supreme Court of the United States,
Mm.
anytime you have members of a major political party in this country who are unwilling to criticize a president, anytime you have, frankly, the lunatics in charge of the asylum, we've got a problem. Now, I could despair, Kim, and I could just say, to hell with it. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm not going to deal with it. I have enough money and enough family and enough support. I don't have to do a damn thing. I refuse to do that. Silence in the face of this kind of outrage needs to be met emphatically. And I would tell you, at times like this, I wish I were in the United States Senate where I could stand up and raise these issues. This is something, if you believe in democracy, and if you believe in a Republican form of government, if you believe that to be true, Donald Trump is the antithesis of all of that. And he doesn't make any bones about it. But I don't want to be viewed simply as a one-trick pony. And people used to say to me, well, all you do is talk about this or that or the other thing. You won't expand your base. Look at the topics we've covered today. If we were making a list of all these topics and there are real concerns, then people need to be aware that even if I were right on one, but I know I'm right on more. Can you imagine, Kim? I want you to just think about this. The ability of a president of the United States to suggest that American citizens be rounded up and deported to a foreign country with a foreign jail. Can you imagine
No.
the outrage that should
Mhm.
be dominant in this country? That the fact of our rights being prejudiced in this fashion? And yet, I hate to say it, there is a deafening silence from
Mm.
too many people. Well, I'm not prepared to roll over. I'm not prepared to say that this is not something that deserves our focus. And you are 100% correct. The Supreme Court has ordered this fellow in the prison in El Salvador to be brought back to the United States. And what does the government of the United States do? They just say, no, we're not going to do it. He's never going to get back into this country. And if he were to get back, we'd deport him again. That's not the democracy that I believe in. And I say this in every public speech that I give and every opportunity I have in my podcast. And certainly when I'm on with you or Mark, we better be alert to the fact that if authoritarianism becomes the rule of thumb in this country, America will no longer be that bastion of freedom. I wish that key Republicans that I've known in the past, including Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, I wish they were alive. I wish that they could speak out because they would be as horrified as I am. And I know somebody's going to say, well, John, you're a left-wing crank. My record proves I'm hardly a left-wing crank. And I've certainly been objective and fair on many things. But every day I wake up and I turn on the news very early in the morning. I generally try to get the 5 o'clock CBS national news. I'm horrified. But
Yeah.
it's the silence of people. It's the
Let me
silence of Republicans.
let
It
me
is the
tell you
fact,
who's
yeah,
not being silent. The There's a letter that has been signed by more than 150 American university presidents decrying the Trump administration. It's been signed by the leaders of Harvard, Princeton, Brown, again, 150 different universities, US colleges and universities signing this statement. They're denouncing Trump's unprecedented government overreach and what they call political interference in higher education. And so it seems that these colleges and universities may be forming a united front against the Trump administration.
They're
You could
going to
argue,
court.
yeah,
Harvard is going to court, but
right.
other universities are doing it. Look, I've been involved on college campuses for most of my life, either teaching or speaking. I've been a professor for many years. Uh, I've never seen anything like it. Uh,
Hmm.
the idea that the federal government would blackmail, and that's the word I'm going to use, would
Right.
blackmail a major university like Harvard or Yale or Princeton or UC Berkeley or UCLA or Stanford or even smaller schools. The fact that they would use this approach is to me so abhorrent. Uh, this is unprecedented in American history. And I read this morning and I heard this morning that Trump offered a compromise to Harvard, and Harvard said, up yours.
Yeah.
And they're absolutely right. There is
Yeah.
no compromise with intolerance and bigotry and blackmail. You don't compromise on those points. And I hope that Donald Trump loses on this. And let me say one other word. They claimed originally that they were doing this because of anti-Semitism. I
Hmm.
have never heard more horse manure in my entire life. I am a Jew who has been in the forefront of the battle for Israel and against Jew hatred all of my adult life. I've never hesitated for Trump to use this as a fig leaf cover for what they are really doing, which is suppressing academic integrity and freedom, is to me horrific. You want to battle anti Semitism? I can tell you a million ways to do it. But cutting research funds for Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Stanford and universities across this country is hardly the way to do it. In fact, those research funds have nothing to do with the question of the rise in hatred of Jews. And I think it's very clear to me that what Donald Trump is doing, again, it's a distraction. It's using an issue. And I'm outspoken on this. And nobody, I want you to understand this, Kim, nobody can fault me for my involvement on the question of Jew hatred, support for Israel, my battle, which I was deeply involved in for the freedom of Soviet Jews. I've been involved my entire life in these issues. And what Donald Trump is doing today is abhorrent to every bone in my body. Now, it doesn't mean that when Donald Trump says if Iran gets out of line, he's willing to whack him, that I'm going to criticize him for that, because Iran is an existential threat to Israel and to the world. So you have to be able to bifurcate, to set up different scenarios. But let me tell you, when he talked about ethnic cleansing in Gaza, I hit the roof. What are you talking about, removing people from Gaza? If anything, what Donald Trump was suggesting was just that, ethnic cleansing.
Yep.
And so understand, it is frustrating for me. There is no doubt about it. And I want to thank you for this therapy session, because I am able to tell people, and look, many of your listeners have known me for 50 years. They've known me on so many different levels.
Mhm.
I'm not speaking irrationally. I'm not speaking without care and without thought. I'm not lashing out for the sake of lashing out. I'm the one, you will recall, on this podcast and in my own podcast, who said that I agreed with Herb Block, the great cartoonist for the Washington Post, when he gave Richard Nixon one clean shave, he said, for America's new president. I was willing to give Donald Trump a clean shave to start out the record. But everything he has done has proven to me that quite the contrary. The man is absolutely abhorrent to every democratic, and I mean that in the purely secular sense of the word, philosophy that I have. He violates the very essence of republicanism. And all you have to do is take a look at where Ronald Reagan stood and compare it with Donald Trump. Just take a look on free trade. It was Ronald Reagan who authored the free trade agreement with Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And what has Donald Trump done? He has rejected the Reagan approach to governing. And I mean, it is, I was no fan of Ronald Reagan, as many of you know. But if Reagan were alive, he would be absolutely up in arms
Mhm.
at what Donald Trump is doing, because it's not consistent with the principles of the Republican Party.
One
Anyway,
of one of the things you mentioned is that you come at this with a level head and using logic, and I love that the note, this letter written by the 150 university and college presidents, said this: "We are open to constructive reform, and we don't oppose legitimate government oversight." There, they seem reasonable, right? We're not saying that you shouldn't have a finger in the the discussion here. What they say is, We must oppose undue government intrusion into the lives of those who learn, live, and work on our campuses. This gathering, using one voice against the Trump administration, I'm hoping that they set an example and that people in other industries that are affected by decisions made by Trump will also organize against
I
him.
hope
And
so.
yeah.
You're right. But do you understand? Donald Trump and the federal government have no business in interfering in the politics of colleges and universities. They never should have a hand in that. The whole point of a college or university is to be able to think for yourself, and even to think for yourself in ways that disagree with the government. Some of
Mhm.
the greatest intellectual discussions I've had on college campuses have been with individuals who have that vital approach. Uh, I don't want to see any bowing of the head or bowing of the knee to these kinds of unconscionable statements being made by the Trump administration, and the grants that have been canceled, uh, affecting science, medicine, have nothing to do with anything more or less than a spiteful anti-Eastern establishment approach. And Donald Trump is now exercising powers which I don't even think he has. I think that these challenges in the courts are going to be critical. And I know that you interview periodically people who are scholars on the court, and the two people to watch, as I said, are Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts. And then the question will be, will Donald Trump abide by decisions made by the Supreme Court?
Mhm.
You get conflicting views on that. How can you have a president of the United States thumb his nose at the courts? It's beyond the balance of what we ought to have as a country. Imagine if Richard Nixon had done that and refused to turn over the tapes. Why, the country would have gone nuts. We've come a long way since the days of Richard Nixon. And whatever you say about Dick Nixon, he had respect for the Constitution, and he knew when enough was enough. And there were people in the Republican Party like Barry Goldwater and Hugh Scott and John Rhodes who had the courage to just say no, enough is enough. That's what we're looking for today. Have you heard from Liz Cheney recently, or
No.
Adam Kinzinger recently, or Chris Christie recently? Have you heard from the Republicans who oppose Trump? No. That's suppression of opinion. And that is certainly not what the Republican Party needs. I'll tell you what I'm really interested in, Kim, is when Donald Trump is gone, how the Republican Party rebuilds, because the rebuilding of that party is going to be critical. We have two-party system in this country, and if the Republicans fail that test, we're in deep trouble. And I say this, I've been called by Richard Norton Smith, a scholar of modern republicanism. I've immersed myself in history of the Republican Party, and believe me, I'm interviewed constantly on this question. The tragedy of the Republican Party will be one of the great epic stories told when this administration is done. And then the rebuilding of the Republican Party is going to be an absolutely essential chapter in preserving American democracy.
I think you're going to love this next topic. The Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, is holding her first meeting of Anti-Christian Bias Task Force. This is a task force, dedicated to eradicating the anti-Christian bias in the federal government. Isn't there supposed to be a separation of church and state? I digress. According to Bondi, the task force will identify any anti-Christian policies across the US government, seek input from faith-based organizations to end anti-Christian bias, and fix deficiencies and regulations that may contribute to anti-Christian bias. I don't think there's an anti-Christian bias in America. I think that that's overwhelmingly what the religion that we're seeing elevated. Why do we need to go through the federal government looking for anti-Christian bias in America? Is this an effort to really turn America into a Christian country and have religion seep back into our government?
This is the most appalling statement by an attorney general of the United States that I've heard in years. There is no anti-Christian bias. It's a myth created by the far right. If you are a Christian and you want to go to church, or you want to contribute to a political action committee based on your principles, you have an absolute right to do it. The idea that the Attorney General of the United States of America is indulging in this kind of nonsense, she ought to be removed from office. There's no question about it. And the fact that the Trump administration is willing to do this is, to me, absolutely appalling. And I say that as a non-Christian, but I have Christian friends who will agree with me 100%. Anti-Christian bias task force, this should be a subject which we discuss and debate, but Pam Bondi has no business being Attorney General of the United States. She also, by the way, still believes the election of 2020 was stolen from Donald Trump. She accepts all of these conspiracy theories, and this is the Attorney General of the United States. It makes my old friend John Mitchell look like a saint.
When you look at this type of task force, or this type of work in the Trump administration, it just it brings to me proof. It seems to me like proof that Project 2025 was the plan all along. I
It
don't know
was.
how I don't know how they have a task force like this and can say that their goal isn't to bring Christianity and merge it in with the federal government and basically push their religious ideas on the rest of us.
You're absolutely right. And let me tell you, as a Jew who lives in a country in which my rights are absolutely guaranteed, I find this to be absolutely abhorrent. Just as I do, and I want to emphasize this, the Trump administration going after so-called anti-Semitism on campus
Mhm.
at the expense of freedom of expression. This is not the America or the American system in which I personally would support. I'm going to do everything I can to oppose this. And I hope that the American people wake up to it. You know, I reread a novel by Philip Roth, great novelist, about what would happen if Charles Lindbergh had been elected president in 1940. And it is worth going back and understanding. We've had the opportunity in the past to make mistakes, but this mistake, including the anti-Christian bias task force, which you have so rightly pointed out today, is absolutely inexcusable. And I hope that our discussing it will expose it to public light in a more dramatic way.
Let's move to Democrats, because you mentioned earlier, what will the Republican Party, how will they rebuild? What will they become in a post-Trump world? But Governor Gavin Newsom gave an exclusive interview to the publication The Hill. And he talks about doing a complete forensic exam of what went wrong in the last election. And he said later in this interview, I don't know what the party is, referring to the Democratic Party. He said, I don't know what the party is. I'm still struggling with that. Do you feel like Democrats need to redefine what the values and the things that Democrats stand for are? Or do you feel like that's pretty well documented and that Governor Newsom, in his effort to maybe move toward the right, has lost touch with what the Democratic Party is?
If Gavin Newsom doesn't know what the Democratic Party is, we're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And all I can say is I felt his comment was ridiculous. And I was asked, would you support Gavin Newsom for president? And the answer is not for the Democratic nomination, not based on his statements. He understands what democracy is, and he understands what is happening, and he ought to be clear and precise about it. Look, the last thing we need, and I talked about Philip Roth earlier in his book, The Plot Against America, the last thing we need is a Democrat, a leading contender for the presidency, the governor of the great state of California, making such an absurd statement. I can define for him what the Democratic Party is. And we know the Democratic Party. It has I have a library full of material on the Democratic Party, including its founding, its history. Jules Witkover wrote a wonderful book on the history of the Democratic Party. And maybe Gavin should reread that book. These kind of absurd statements from the left, from the right, from wherever they come, upset me terribly. I know what the Republican Party was traditionally. I know what the Democratic Party has been traditionally. And I'll tell you the problem, really, when you boil it down. People don't remember their history. But more than that, and Kim, this is Rothmann's complaint, if we're going to talk about Philip Roth and novelists and Portnoy's complaint. Once upon a time, the Republican Party had a liberal wing and a conservative wing. And the Democratic Party had a liberal wing and a conservative wing. And because they had these wings, they had real debates and discussions. Now, those two wings have been clipped. A bird doesn't fly with clipped wings. So I want a healthy debate within both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party that reflects trends and attitudes. But I think Gavin's statement is completely irresponsible and wrong. And I've known Gavin for many, many years. And if he were sitting here in the room with me, I'd tell him the same thing. We interviewed him at KGO on innumerable occasions.
Multiple times, yeah.
This kind of statement is absolute nonsense,
Well,
and he ought to be ashamed of himself.
there may be some that say, look at what happened in the last election. Democrats thought they were giving this message of hope. They thought that, we had it in the bag because clearly the message was so much better, and that it all came down to, and I think it was more hate and blame than the price of eggs, but allegedly it all came down to the economy, right? And it's there. I can see the thought that when you lose like this, that maybe you need to retool, that you need to regather,
Of
that you need
course,
to
whenever you
rethink.
lose an election,
Right.
you have to retool.
Mhm.
You know what I do when I can't sleep at night? I read the Democratic and Republican Party platforms.
You do?
Of course, because they're
Okay.
so dull, so uninteresting. But the point is, the Democratic Party has certain founding principles. The Republican Party has certain principles as well. And those principles have to be discussed and debated. And I'm not interested in an autopsy of why the Democrats lost. I know why the Democrats lost. You want to know why? They didn't get enough votes. That's why they lost.
Well, he's
And
saying that you have to go back and do that autopsy, that you have to go back then and basically figure out what the Democratic Party stands
I'll
for
tell you what the
in order
Democratic
to be
Party should stand
successful
for.
moving forward.
The Democratic Party has to stand against what Donald Trump is doing to the United States of America.
Yeah.
They need to go forward and say, we do believe in academic freedom. We do believe in having a strong foreign policy. We do believe in defending democracy around the world. We do believe in freedom of expression on college and university campuses. This is not rocket science. This is nonsense. And my objection to a Gavin Newsom is he plays into Donald Trump's business. Look, when I do a podcast, you know what Gavin Newsom did to start his podcast? He interviewed the conservatives. He didn't interview people who had rational approaches to America. And you want to rebuild a political party? Many years ago, there was a book written called Democracy at the Crossroads. And leading Democrats wrote opinions about what the future of the Democratic Party should be. But all of them held to one principle, and that was that the Democratic Party had to represent values, the values of voting rights and civil rights, the idea of proper taking care of the earth. It's the antithesis of the Republicans. You want to win an election? Draw the differences. Get candidates who will run and state them clearly and precisely. And I think that's the answer. An autopsy of a political party, hell, that's what the Republicans did in '64 after Goldwater lost. You know what they did, though? They didn't hire somebody to analyze why Goldwater lost. I could explain it. Anybody could. They got a technician, a Ray Bliss, who was the chairman of the Republican Party in Ohio, and they put him in charge of rebuilding the Republican Party, seeking candidates, putting together platforms, putting together programs. And they articulated it, and the Republicans gained 47 seats in the House of Representatives in 1966 because that's what Ray Bliss and others forced them to do. That's what the Democrats have to do. Yeah. And the rest of it, I frankly found Gavin Newsom's observations ridiculous. And I would tell him if he walked up to me, I only wish his father was still alive. His father would have given him holy hell. Judge Newsom understood it very clearly. And Gavin, you should remember that.
Here's the comment from Mindy, and I think this is the danger with Gavin Newsom trying to collect this more conservative middle of the country base. She says, I won't vote for any turncoat. And if that's Gavin's game, it's game over. So people that are progressive, this progressive base, he may be losing favor with progressives when he tries
it doesn't matter.
Kim,
in the end, it comes down to two candidates, a Democratic candidate for president and a Republican candidate for president. And you have to make a choice. So let's assume it were J.D. Vance against Gavin Newsom. Let's just assume that for a moment. I'd back Gavin Newsom to the hills.
Right.
So I can be critical of a particular candidate. I do a program in which I point out what Democratic leaders said about John F. Kennedy before he was a Democratic nominee for president. Adlai Stevenson, Lyndon Johnson, Stuart Symington, they all blasted Kennedy. But when push came to shove, they all supported him in the election of 1960. And that's how he defeated Richard Nixon. So my attitude is, give me the choice and I will give you a response. But don't speak in the abstract. Don't say I'd never vote for Gavin Newsom. Of course she'd vote for Gavin Newsom against a J.D. Vance. So would we all.
John Rothman can be heard on his daily podcast, Around the Political World with John Rothman. What, 5 minutes? It's a shorty. It's a short
I
thing.
give not more than 10 minutes.
Okay.
It is free. It is my observations. I'm told we have about 100,000 listeners now, and it's constantly growing. I just had a call from a guy in Missouri who listens to the podcast, who was meeting today with one of the leading Republicans in the state of Missouri and wanted my advice, or in Kansas. What was my advice? I said, you've got it, nail them on these issues. But it is a clear choice, Kim. And I want to thank you. And I want to thank Mark for making this forum available. The more people who hear it, by the way, I want to put another plug for the Voice of San Francisco. I do a podcast, daily podcast for them, 10 minutes each day. So I'm doing 2 podcasts a day. And I only wish, and I say it with all sincerity, that we were back at KGO with a 50,000 watt station, which was listened to everywhere, because we need to wake people up. And thank you, Kim, for spending this time with me. And I appreciate it.
John Rothman, everybody. Thanks for being here.
See you next week.
Hi. See you
Hi,
next
it's Mark,
week.
and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.